Welcome back, everybody, to another Pickled Dragon Unscripted. We have, as always, the very lovely and talented Dracoya.
We've got Zuko in my lap, who may or
Yes,
may not
with
have
a
decided to pop up.
Zuko who keeps vanishing and reappearing like a
But you
magic
can see
trick.
like this one like white triangle in his fur. It's too
White
cute.
patch. And then the rest of him blends in with the skull and crossbones there in the background. So yeah, I recently ran a D&D game for some youths, and the adults that asked me to do it for them paid me in whiskey. So I got that going for me. Some Bondstone Double Oak Kentucky Straight Bourbon
Hey,
whiskey. That's
that's
what I'm talking
lovely.
about. I'll gladly work for booze. Um, and, it sounds like plenty of the WotC guys would be willing to do that too. Um, we recently talked about how Chris Perkins left WotC and the implications of that. And of course, that left some other folks behind that probably could have held the torch, Jeremy Crawford being one of them. And well, it turns out Jeremy Crawford is now leaving. And of course, Chris Cow also left. I think he was the one of the honchos in charge of our ill-fated VTT venture or WotC's venture?
So who's left at this point?
That's a good question. That's something we'll talk about. But we have an article that we can look at where they talk about who's coming, but it's like how many more, it's like the foundation. When the foundation crumbles, it doesn't matter how many bricks you have up above. Um, it's all going to come down. It reminds me oh, you know what it reminds me of is when I was reading about the first edition Stronghold Guide, and they were talking about hiring all the miners to dig under the walls to undermine that foundation to bring it all down. Well, Jacoy, I think you hit the nail on the head. Who's left? Um, there's this article from Screen Rant, which
We love Screen Rant.
we know it's Screen Rant, therefore, whatever. But um, they do talk about who is left and who's going to be put in the position. So yeah, so Jeremy Crawford, adios. Obviously Chris Perkins is gone, Chris Cow's gone. Uh, Now we have, let's see, they talk about who's left. And they talk about here, let's see. Jess Lanzillo said this was something that the company had prepared for. Both of them have been working on Dungeons and Dragons for a very long time, Lanzillo said. It's been a point of discussion for some time and something that we've been training up everyone for. They feel really good about the team that they have in place and the legacy that they're passing on. Hmm. So,
Mhm.
let's ask you guys, do you think that this has been a known thing coming, like all these departures, or is it more, the wheels have fallen off the wagon and everyone's bailing out?
I think it's probably more like that. I mean, retirement was gonna happen with any industry, no matter what, but this doesn't feel like retirement. Like you said, it feels like the wheels are falling off the wagon and they're like, oh, well, guess it doesn't drive anymore. Peace.
I think, because they did say that both Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford are retiring. If they hook, it's possible that WotC or Hasbro said, here's a nice golden parachute. Here's a bunch of money. Just don't sign on to another company for X number of years. Because if they go the Mike Merle's path where he jumps onto another group, it does send a signal, right? It does send a signal that hey, there is a major problem inside of this company. And I think it's pretty obvious that there is, but it's possible that they just gave them a bunch of money to sit on their hands for a while. But if they do end up in another place, they do join another company, another development, I would look really bad, you know. That would look really
On
bad because
WotC.
yeah, I mean like if they're sitting here saying, "Oh, we knew they were going to be retiring. We knew this was coming and we've got everyone trained up." Well, um yeah, I don't know.
Probably the only thing that WotC's done right from a business perspective with regards to D&D is is how they're handling this. Because I bet you they're right. I bet you you're right. I bet you they have like a huge packet that says you will continue to get X amount of sales and you can get all this stuff, but you're not allowed to badmouth WotC. You're not allowed to join another company for X amount of years. Like all these all these restrictions on them. And that's probably the only thing that WotC as a company has done correctly is dissolve the original team.
And that's pretty typical for a corporation to do when
Yeah.
somebody of importance of substance leaves a company. There's oftentimes a non-compete clause that has to be signed, especially if there's some kind of severance or golden parachute where they land with a whole bunch of cash. And that prevents that person, from like Turcoya said, saying anything bad or recruiting, like stealing employees away to go form your own venture, that sort of thing. I have personally seen companies make a mistake and not have someone of importance sign a non-compete clause on their departure, and it was a huge, huge blunder as that person just poached all the good people from the company.
Mm-hmm.
So, if these guys nothing's heard from them for a while, it doesn't really mean anything either. Um, it could still, I mean, we could still be seeing quite a bit of problems. But Lanzillo, she continues. Um, They wanted to make sure that the core rule books were really successful, that they were setting up all of the future lead for success. And that has happened. And they feel really reassured that the folks in place will be able to carry on with the wonderful legacy that they have given us and then bring their own stuff to the table, which they have already been doing. Oh, that reminds me of when that Mackenzie DeArmas, like a couple of years ago or whatever. One of the most iconic magic items from D&D is the deck of many things. And Gary Gygax created it in the 70s, and part of the lore of it was that no one knew who created it. It was like this thing that this lost lore. Maybe the inventor of the deck decided they were going to draw a card and they pulled the void card and they were pulled into the void. And no one knew, some adventurer found some dusty old tower somewhere and they found this deck and it went out into the world to punish other people. Well, Mackenzie DeArmas, she wrote that her own personal character was one of the characters or one of the creators of the deck of many things. She wrote it into the canon of D&D. I mean, it's like, oh, the hubris, you know? Uh,
Yeah. I remember we did a video on that and you had a whole rant about it. It was not, whew, you were not happy about that.
the hubris. Yes. So, you know, let's see, it's one of those things where you've finished a major keystone creative project and you ask yourself, okay, do I have a next one in me right now? Do I want to do something a little bit different? I think any creative can identify with that. So, yeah, so here where they
Yeah.
talk
Because I'm
about,
sure that's what happened.
yes, exactly. Um, so they're talking about other designers, Justin Armin, but I don't know how you can, I mean, Chris Perkins has been around since second edition days. He wrote for Dungeon Magazine. Um, and he's a powerhouse, say what you will about him, but he was uh a real development genius, if you will. A genius might be a little extreme, but he knew what he was doing, and I think it's really, really difficult to replace that level of experience when you have somebody who's been through what, three and a half, four editions of D&D, um, and all of those different. And you got to admit that second edition, third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition, they are all completely different design choices. So
So different. Night and day, not
yeah,
even like a comparison.
so you're going to replace that person who's experienced all of those, different game engines.
Yeah, that
Uh,
you can't. There's no way.
yeah. So
WotC is clearly on the path of dismantling it. I think that sooner rather than later, they're going to announce that they're just going to not make another edition ever again. And or didn't they already announce that?
yeah, they said this was going to be the last
Yeah,
edition.
that's right. Yeah, and this is clearly on that war path. It's clearly on that war path of where they're headed.
But I also heard a rumor though, and rumors, but I mean it's out there, where they said that, oh well, the current edition of D&D, and this might have started erroneously or not, but it might have started because of the poor performance, but that they might only sit on this for 4 or 5 years and then change things up again. So who knows?
Maybe I think it's going to depend on what happens in the world a lot. I mean, I think Stranger Things revitalized it so much. I just feel like they're beating a dead horse at this point. So unless there's another pop culture event that takes place in the next 4 to 5 years that would revitalize it, I don't see how it could. But in the meantime, in the next 4 or 5 years, I think we're going to see a lot more individual tabletop games come up. I think that this could be a new era for tabletop. And surely, I think that after about a year, maybe two, one or two of them is going to rise to the top, and it is going to be the new pinnacle of what people are playing.
And that's what I told the kids that I ran that game for. I said, you guys are really lucky because when I first started getting into role-playing games, D&D was it. That 1E and obviously the basic set and all that. That was it. That's what was our options. There were a few other games here and there, but today there are, I said, you have the sky's the limit if you're willing to experiment, and you will find that there are better game systems out there and much more fun game systems if you're just willing to try something, and not just get, starstruck by the big name. The big IP is Dungeons and Dragons, but think of Dungeons and Dragons as a generic like Coke. I want to order a Coke. Well, we only have Pepsi. Yeah, I'll take a Coke. Same thing, right?
Same thing.
Uh, yeah, same. So whether you're playing D&D, fantasy role playing, I think that we uh, we're living in a really great era for fantasy role playing games, for role playing games in general, really. And yeah, I'm excited, but I think the folks at WotC might be a little bit less excited because their stranglehold on the industry, I think, is going to wane in due time.
Yeah, I would agree. They just didn't play it right at all. They played it like a bunch of people who have MBAs and daddy's money, but not anyone that was unpopular in high school, let's say.
Yeah, I at this point, I don't really. I think the article has I've lost interest in the article because there's really not much else to say. When you lose two big guys like Perkins, obviously being a much bigger guy. Um,
Maybe it's time for us to start our own company, Matt.
woohoo!
Yeah, we can start our own
Will it be
tabletop.
a distillery of role playing games?
Don't see why not. Who else wants to come? Who else would be on board on this? Comment, like, subscribe. And as always, guys, come back and have another round on us.
Woo!